Hello everyone. Today I have a confession to make. I tend to find vegetables that don't naturally do well in my growing conditions and then obsess over getting them to grow. Big, beautiful, crisp bulb fennel is one of these vegetables. This video, while I will share some general guidelines for growing fennel, is more specific to having success with bulb fennel in Ohio and similar climates. Fennel can be quite easy to grow when grown in conditions similar to its native Mediterranean climate. It likes plentiful sunshine, mild temperatures, warm soil with good drainage, and doesn't like it overly hot or humid. For anyone who has never been to Ohio, we have none of these things. What Ohio does have is spring weather that is variable and unpredictable. Spring frost and even snow can be happening into April and May, just before our last frost-free date. And just as suddenly, temperatures can skyrocket into the 80s. And unfortunately, these kinds of conditions can make traditional bulb fennel quick to bolt. The first and most important tip I can give you towards having success with bulb fennel, and note that this is bulb fennel that I'm speaking of, not the herb bronze fennel, is to seek out day neutral or intermediate day varieties. These have been bred to be less sensitive to day length and more resistant to bolting. In the older traditional Italian or Florence fennel types, those types are very sensitive to day length. So in northern latitudes, if you would plant in spring, going into the lengthening days of summer, that would immediately cause older varieties to bolt. And these types are not a good match for my growing area or any similar growing areas. Some of the most adaptable varieties on the market today have resulted from crosses made between the old Florence types and Zephafino lineage. Now, Zephafino was a variety that was bred in 1970 in Switzerland specifically for its bolt tolerance. Now, a few varieties that I have had success with in my own garden include Dragon, Preludio, and Orion. Now, I've seen a lot of advice out there saying that you must direct sow bulb fennel. Nope, I cannot direct sow bulb fennel here. My season is not long enough. And I don't mean that my number of days between frost-free dates is not long enough, but rather the amount of time that I have between moderately cool, mild spring temperatures and when the temperature decides to jump into the upper 90s is not long enough to successfully raise bulb fennel from seed direct sown. Fennel's ideal growing temperatures are in the range of about 65 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So I start my seed indoors about 4 to 6 weeks before my desired transplant date. In Ohio, with an estimated last spring frost of right around May 10th to May 15th, my timeline looks like this. I start my seed indoors around March 10th. I'm a little late this year, starting it on about March 15th, but I aim for about that second week of March. I transplant out around April 20th. And this will generally allow me a harvest by about mid to the third week of June. So you want to be very careful when transplanting, not to damage the roots and not to wait too long before transplanting, because the root disruption can be yet another reason that fennel will bolt. I also grow fennel in the fall, starting seed indoors in early July, transplanting out in mid-August, and harvesting right around the time of my first fall frost, so mid-October. To start fennel indoors, I sow seed about 1/4 of an inch deep in individual cells filled with my seed starting mix and thoroughly dampen the soil. I place a humidity dome over the tray just until the seeds have germinated, and I have these on a 12 on, 12 off light schedule. Once the seedlings are several inches tall, I begin feeding them at each watering with a low-dose, all-natural seedling fertilizer and keep a fan on them to strengthen the seedlings. Now, fennel is technically a cool season crop and will tolerate a light frost, but it's not nearly as cold hardy as something like, say, kale. Before planting, I ensure that my seedlings are thoroughly hardened off, and I cover my seedlings with frost cloth if temperatures are going to drop below 30. I've heard that they're hardy down to 25 Fahrenheit, but I don't like to take my chances. As with all my cool season crops, with the weather being so variable this time of year, I try to pick a stretch of weather that's going to be mild. So aiming for at least 50 degrees for a stretch of several days, ideally a week. The weather often doesn't cooperate with my planting plans, but I try to give them the gentlest start to garden life as I can. Conversely, when planting in the midsummer for a fall harvest, I'm shooting for a stretch of slightly cooler, preferably overcast days to transplant, which again can be tricky to find in mid-August, but I do my best. Sometimes if we're having an intensely hot, sunny August and I have to get transplants in the ground, I will cover them with shade cloth for a couple days to allow them to get acclimated. Fennel will appreciate a planting site located in full sun with fertile, well-drained soil in a pH range of 6 to 7. I generally work in a good dose of compost to the planting area before transplanting or feed my seedlings with a couple tablespoons of all-natural plant food. I like to use root crops alive. I space my seedlings about 12 inches apart. I've read some planting instructions that advise 6-inch spacing for full-size bulbs, but I like giving them a little more space because the mature plants are quite large. Planting too closely can lead to premature bolting. Providing fennel with consistent moisture will also make it very happy. About 1 inch a week is ideal, and I always mulch my seedlings with grass clippings. This is to help both retain moisture in the soil and keep the soil cool. And because I know I will probably be asked this question, I have not had any issues interplanting bulb fennel with anything else in my garden. There seems to be a belief floating around out there that fennel, in particular the herb bronze fennel, does not play well with others and that you should keep it separated from all of your other plants. But this has not been my own experience, and I've yet to find any scientific studies that actually back this up. I did come across a 2011 study which looked at a dried extract obtained from the fennel in vitro, and it was shown to inhibit germination in 4 various weeds. But dried extracts in vitro behave very, very differently than plants in the garden. But frankly, a lot of the information out there in internet land is poppycock. Gems such as don't plant fennel near other garden vegetables because it will taint their flavor is one of my favorites and is patently false. But if anyone out there is aware of any kind of scientific studies that have been done on the allelopathic properties of fennel in the garden, please share that information. I'd love to look at that. Fennel is ready to harvest when the bulb, or more technically, the swollen portion of the stem that we call a bulb, is plump and firm, but before the plant wants to send up a bolting stalk or the foliage starts to turn yellowish. You can snip the bulbs off at ground level, or like me, if you're out in the garden without a cutting implement, you can just twist and pull the bulbs off. Now, bulb fennel is crisp, juicy, slightly sweet, and has a flavor that is reminiscent of anise or licorice. If you're not a fan of licorice, don't let that immediately throw you off. I've known quite a few people who don't like licorice, but actually very much enjoy fennel. I, for one, think black licorice is delightful, but I digress. If the bulbs are tough or woody, they are overmature. Fennel is amazing braised, used in soups, grilled, but my favorite and probably easiest preparation of all time is a shaved fennel and green apple salad with a lemon vinaigrette. And I will include a link to that recipe on my blog for anyone who is interested. And all parts of the fennel are actually edible. The leaves can be snipped and used in a manner similar to dill. Stalks, although they can be quite tough, can be added to soups and broths to impart flavor. Fennel roots can be peeled and eaten like carrots. Fennel flowers and pollen are finding their way onto the menus of gourmet restaurants. And if left to bolt, the seeds can be used as seasoning as well. Now, if you are already on the fennel bandwagon, let me know your favorite way to use this vegetable. And if you haven't grown fennel already, I hope that you'll give it a try this year. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.